Right. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for allowing us to speak today, Ollie and I. Yeah, just to give a bit of an introduction, I suppose we are from the National Railway Museum, based in York. It's part of the Science Museum Group, and the group's current collecting policy, published in 2021, has quite a significant focus on contemporary collecting. And just to note that our organisation views contemporary as anything that's broadly within the last 10 years as well. So today we're going to be talking about HS2 collecting. HS2, for those of you that don't know, and I'm sure there aren't that many that don't, given recent news, but HS2 is a UK high-speed rail line and construction project which was originally approved by the Labour government in 2009 and then backed by the Conservative government in 2010, and construction started in 2017. The original plan was to have a high-speed rail line with 225-mile-an-hour trains that ran from London to Birmingham, and then there'd be two offshoots. So there'd be one going towards Crewe via Manchester and one to Leeds via Sheffield. And the latest official estimate costing on that, which was back in 2021, was between 72 and 98 billion for the whole project. And the work that we're doing is all about collecting voices on all sides of the HS2 debate. So I'll just move on to the next slide and let Ollie talk about that.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. So this was a really strange one to start contemporary collecting around because unlike some of the other sort of topics, it's really complicated and it's very easy to oversimplify. And the thing that we found going into it was that the public was hugely divided on this topic. You know, sometimes when you do contemporary collecting, there is a bespoke community that exists, or it's a very clear-cut debate, but this one had supporters and critics on both sides of the political spectrum. It didn't cleave particularly to age or gender or political ideology or regions particularly. And there were both, like, even the environmental message, there were strong people with environmental credentials and passions on both sides of the project as well. So it was very hard to try and get a sort of grasp on what we understood as the sort of groups. But knew we needed to do this because protesters have always been part of our collection and of the railways. There were people who objected to the railways from the start of the 19th century, but almost nothing survives of that, particularly of accounts of opposition to the railways. They're often very dry, often very boring, and they're often overused because there's so few of them, and you're seeing a couple of them on the page at the moment. And most of the sort of passion of that has been completely lost to time. So we had a sort of came about this thinking about what are the risks if we don't do this. We risk replicating that knowledge gap, you know, like the sins of curatorial past become the sins of curatorial future. So we're just handing a problem on to future curators and only telling a partial story because the established HS2 will have its records collected by the National Archives as a sort of major project. So we're missing the sort of the other side and the very human parts of the debate. And we think it's the focus on the environment, particularly for and against, is something that seems to really enthuse our visitors and presumably will do more so as time goes on. I'm now going to hand over to Rob.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, so this is really what the kind of core of this presentation is all about. It's how did we actually mitigate some of the risks that come with collecting something so divisive? So first of all, we had to establish what those risks actually are. We kind of know that HS2 is the kind of biggest rail project of which there's kind of this controversy, but there are numerous similar projects, not on the same scale. And we know that this work will then feed into ourselves collecting other protest material as well. So we were worried that if we did this wrong, we could damage the organisational reputation of the Science Museum Group. We could also negatively impact the relationships that we have with corporate funders, and we know how important those are sort of to the museums in recent years. We can platform views that are inaccurate, hateful and harmful as well. And I know there's case studies, Ellie, in your and your team's paper about the ethical considerations with regards to contemporary collecting. We could appear biased in the debate, and it's important to note that the Science Museum Group is broadly supportive of HS2, and this is something that we told and we keep telling every single person that we speak to, because it's extremely important that they know what the organisational view is, even if that doesn't represent that of all the staff there. It's important that they're aware of that. We don't want to impress our own personal views, as I've just mentioned, mislead stakeholders or incite colleague abuse, especially front of house colleagues and those that monitor the social media, for example. So the ways that we can limit the impact of these risks, or the way that we went out to do this was we first spoke with organisations that have experience doing this. And one thing that Ollie and I and all my team absolutely love about the museum sector is that real freedom of sharing information. I mean, today is, a great example of that. There's a real push in the industry to really share the things that we've learned, and that's brilliant because we were able to speak with the People's History Museum, which deals with a lot of this similar material, Bishopsgate Institute in London, and Museum Sheffield Trust as well, who had recently had an exhibition all about protests within Sheffield. And through this, we developed a feasibility paper, which included a background to the project and the scope and objectives of the project. So what this project must do, should do, could do, and won't do. We also defined who the stakeholders are for this project, created a risk management strategy, which I'll go on to in a second, and define what the initial program would be for the initial stages of the work, that kind of muddy part of the project. I keep using the word project. This is business as usual. This isn't a project. This is work that we're doing, and that's constantly moving. So this is a risk matrix that we developed as part of that feasibility paper. I won't go through everything on here, but just to say, anybody who's ever done risk assessments knows that you look at the likelihood of something happening and the impact that it could have. So if you look at the top right there, on one of the biggest impacts that we were really worried about, we thought that the Science Museum Group could seem to be endorsing anti or pro HS2 messages, and this collecting really wanted to, well, it needs to be an objective approach to that, even if the museum group is broadly supportive of the project. So from there, we then created this this spreadsheet where we've got all the risk mitigation. So we've got all 17 risks there listed, and these slides will be shared so you can see these. But for each risk, we also created actions, again, typical of a risk assessment. But just to bring out an example then, let's have a look. We've got the anti-HS2 protest groups. Maybe they would be reluctant to engage with the Science Museum Group. So to mitigate this, we thought, well, let's use existing contacts that we have, give them a clear reason for collecting, and also have a written statement of intent for collecting alongside our work, so that, if anything gets a bit hairy, we can point towards this and say, well, look, this is our official stance on this, and so that we don't have clumsy communication with partners. And all of this was shared with our senior management team. We were very, very transparent throughout the whole process, and the senior management team approved it. And from my perspective, I think it's to great credit that our senior management team actually did something that is quite risky, because they didn't have to. And I think that it's extremely important, as we presented, that we collect this work, and yeah, that's fantastic because of that. So again, I'll pass on to Ollie now for examples of objects that we were collecting.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to show you just a little taste of some of the things, and bear in mind, like, this is still live. As Rob says, not a project, it's part of our ongoing sort of work stream. So we're still getting things in, we're still in negotiations, but we've got this, this is like a pressure group within the Green Party. So Greens for HS2, there's also a Greens against HS2 as well. We're in conversation with them as well. We're like very into their quite stylish merch, this group. So we're collecting bits and pieces, some of which have been at party conference and things like that. Could I have the next slide, please,
Yeah,
Rob?
no problem.
So we wanted to try and actually, it's quite hard to find physical objects. Sometimes there are a lot of this is written material, or particularly just born digital material as well. So this was something we I think Rob found and was we got very excited about, which was the Covington pear tree, which was a tree that was on the route of HS2, and was felled despite being given the sort of Woodland Trust's Tree of the Year award in 2015. It was felled in 2020, but the felled tree was grafted on. There are 40 new trees, but it also, we thought, told a lot of the sort of wider stories about objections about historic woodlands, about people's sort of concern for felling parts of the environment, for where the landscapes that the route was going to change. So in discussion with the Woodland Trust about that. And then this is Talia Wooden, who's absolutely incredible youth activist, photojournalist, filmmaker. I don't know if that really gives her justice, that description. I mean, she's absolutely incredible images. But she's also very involved in a lot of this. So she's like a member of the squatter communities, and her photos really capture encampment communities and activities. And this, like coming back to our risk matrix, this was how we wanted to try and why we wanted to be so careful with this, because some of the groups that we're talking to are involved in protest or involved in sort of essentially like trespass activity and opposition to construction. So we wanted to be very, very careful and make them understand that we had no prior sort of, we had no established for or against position on this, and that we wanted to be a safe pair of hands that could sort of represent their story without misrepresenting their story, I suppose. So like and Talia's work is, I think, like both visually striking and a really great way to get into those discussions and those movements. Back to Rob.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a big elephant in the room. All the news that was about this time last month when the northern leg was scrapped. Rishi Sunak's decision to make that at the Tory Party conference on the 4th of October this or last month. So how's the scrapping of that impacted our collecting? Well, it's simply a continuation of the ongoing story. The fact is that this is a live issue in the railways. It's a live debate in the railways. It's a live construction project. As I say, this collecting work is business as usual for us. As long as HS2 is going, this will divisive voices will still be in there. And if anything, actually, there's now more pro HS2 objects that are coming to light, which you may expect, because it's now the pro HS2 voices that aren't seeing what they want delivered being delivered, and that's when protest happens, obviously. So the collecting strategy remains exactly the same, and in fact, we've even started to accession some of the related objects. So Ollie has been leading on collecting these beer mats on the left-hand side. These were given at the Tory Party conference by an anonymous activist and put on all the tables. And if you can see there, they've got the North Remembers on the front side, and on the back, a list of quotations from Conservative politicians over the last decade in support of HS2 with reasons that would benefit the North. And then on the right-hand side there, this is something I'm leading on, another political one. We've got a sign held by Labour, 5 Labour Metro Mayors, so Sadiq Khan, Andy Burnham, Tracy Brabin, Oliver Coppard and Steve Rotherham, to dissuade the Prime Minister's expected decision just a few days earlier on the 27th of September. And Ollie.
Yeah, so I just thought I'd finish off by talking about lessons learned and what's next. I think we never do enough of this across the sector. Like I love a good lessons learned board. I'm not going to go through it in complete detail, but there's a one of the things here, as Rob was just saying, the political landscape of HS2 changed very quickly. There are a number of like frantic meetings where we message each other on Teams at sort of 8:30 in the morning, be like, have you seen the news this morning? But actually we found that because we'd put in such a sort of robust structure from the start, we were able to actually react to those quite quickly, and we found that it didn't change our sort of collecting policy overall. I think one of the other ones we talked about, our collecting policy can be quite slow, like a lot of museums, and we've talked about building in more time, being more flexible. These are always emerging conversations, and as the political landscape shifted, people have sort of got very busy suddenly going backwards and forwards. Suddenly, now that it's been cancelled, a lot of the anti-HS2 groups who were fairly defeatist when we started the project are now suddenly much more active again. So we're having we're picking up and dropping conversations as we go. Yeah, and I think so the next step's just to try and continue weaving this into our business as usual, but also trying to use the lessons that we've learned from this to inform contemporary collecting more broadly. We use this a little bit as a test balloon as well as a project that we want to collect ourselves. And I think we're hoping to get this material out there for teaching, community engagement, exhibitions, other museum activities, not just now because it's so relevant, but in the future, in 20, 30, 40 years' time. And the way that can sort of continue to feed into academic projects, placement students, research ideas going forward.
And just to say, if anybody wants to follow up on this, obviously we'll have questions, but if you wanted to follow up after our, our contact details are there. We also have Alison, who's currently on annual leave. She's also helping lead this project. She's brilliant. Cool. I will hand over.